Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. It's Monday, April 7th. I'm Tim Priester with Drew Mentak from Irish Illustrated, John Bryce of Football Scoop and Irish Illustrated, and Pete Sampson of The Athletic. We have talked about this quite a bit between analysis, written analysis, and podcasts and instance and stuff like that. We have not, however, added Pete Sampson's opinion to the equation. He was there with us on Saturday for the scrimmage. Pete, let's start talking about quarterbacks. I know a lot of people want the definitive answer on who's going to be the starting quarterback based upon Saturday, but I don't think I'm speaking out of turn for the Irish Illustrated part of this when I say that nobody played poorly among the quarterbacks on Saturday. We don't necessarily think somebody has taken a lead or an advantage. And again, that's just our observation. The coaches have had 9 opportunities to evaluate them. But just what did you see on Saturday with the quarterbacks? And then we'll kick it around a little bit as to who might be in the lead or who did the best.
I mean, we've all been doing this for a while, and it was probably as inconclusive a viewing at quarterback as I can remember. For every open practice, there's always somebody who looks better than somebody else, and like I'm just not sure. I feel like I'd be forcing it if I said, "Oh, it was Carr or it was Angeli." I thought that if it was a 7-on-7 competition, Angeli was the best. But in the team, I thought it was Minchie or Carr, and I couldn't really tell you which one was better. And part of that is like Minchie and Carr both had the best plays, but they also had the worst plays. So, if you take Marcus Freeman at his word that, he wants you to protect the ball first and foremost, man, Angeli did a better job of that than Minchie and Carr. But I think from a fan base and probably your listeners, they're like, forget that. We wanted the guy who can throw the walk-off touchdown pass at the end of the scrimmage, and that's CJ Carr. So it was I was expecting to like somebody above the other two, and I just walked out of there thinking like they were all pretty good.
Is that John? Is that a bad thing? I think some people are interpreting it as a bad thing. And yet, I mean, if all three still seem to be competing at a high level for the position on
Yeah,
April 5th, isn't that a good thing?
yeah, I don't see it as a bad thing. I've alluded to this. I'll drive home the point again. Think about how bad this quarterback room was not very long ago, and think about why they kept having to go into the portal and find graduate transfers and fifth-year guys or fourth-year guys or whatever. And now all three of these guys are homegrown products that are in their second or beyond spring in the Notre Dame football program. So if a guy had eliminated himself on Saturday, I don't think there's any of the four of us that wouldn't have said player X eliminated himself. We did not see anybody do anything so catastrophic on Saturday that it eliminated him. We also didn't see anybody do anything so transcendent on Saturday that it immediately elevated him. We saw good from all three. I thought Angeli's best good was in the 7-on-7, which is not real football, but he was not terrible in real football. He just wasn't as effective. And Minchie had some great things, showed the most with his legs, which we had anticipated, but he had by far the worst turnover of the day. And then Carr had the walk-off touchdown pass and another off-platform throw, I think, to KK Smith that I thought was even better than the touchdown pass, but also he was not overly consistent and got flushed out a few times. So again, and also having said all of that, nobody eliminated himself on Saturday behind an offensive line that effectively had two real players on it.
Yeah, no doubt. Drew, you and I mean, we talked about check downs and Carr chose those. I thought Angeli did the best at going through his progressions. I thought, but again, that was the 7-on-7 is what I have in mind. I know there was one time where he looked at 1-2 and then hit somebody with his third look in the progression. But I mean, checkdowns aren't bad. He avoided making a mistake. But again, when we're seeing a scrimmage and seeing live action for the first time with the quarterbacks in the spring, we have a tendency to look for something a little bit, not necessarily spectacular, but a little bit something that differentiates them. And he made the smart move and check down, which is not a bad thing either.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with what was impressive about Angeli is he was anticipating when guys were about to get open, and I think that's why he looked so good in 7-on-7 is he was releasing the ball right as somebody was about to come open in the middle of the field. And I think Carr had a couple opportunities to do that. One stood out for me in particular where Jaden Greathouse kind of got open to like kind of the far side of the field, about 15, 20 yards downfield, but he had already looked to his check down. And I think maybe what we saw is he doesn't have that ability to like anticipate that to the same degree that a veteran like Steve Angeli does. And that's something he can certainly get better at. But I agree that's something that he didn't make a big mistake. It wasn't anything catastrophic, but you also don't want to, you want to get those passing plays down the field. And that's what we feel like could really open up this offense. And we saw Carr do that in team at the very end, but against zone, we didn't necessarily see that in 7-on-7.
We'll talk more about the quarterbacks in segment two when we get to the question portion of Irish Illustrated Insider. But running backs didn't really get much of a chance to differentiate themselves. It was mainly if there were 60 plus plays, how many of those were runs? 15? I don't know. I'm just guessing, Pete. But did anybody catch your eye other than, oh my God, Jeremiah Love is on the ground favoring his, is it his knee? Oh no, it's his hamstring. I mean, I think we all kind of had the same reaction when you see him go down. I personally thought, oh God, it's his knee again,
Yeah,
and
I
you
did
didn't
too.
want that. But he tweaked the hamstring and he limped off, and there's no need to see him again. He probably wasn't going to do anything of real note in the blue gold game, but I don't think there's any doubt now that he'll be sidelined on April 12th.
I think the only back who sort of like I was like, all right, was Aeneas Williams, and I'm not saying that he's had the Kyron Williams freshman to sophomore transformation in terms of the way he's put together, but I feel like he looks like a better athlete to me than he did last year, even at the end of the season when he was making that play against Penn State. And um, look, he's clearly number three, and that's fine. But I think Notre Dame's going to have a better number three running back this year than they did last year, even though it's Aeneas Williams is still the number three running back.
Yeah, three is a comfortable number. When you start getting beyond that, and I think Jaywan Sider um, has enough of a background that he will have a really good feel for how that balance is. But Drew, Williams, I believe he had the longest run. It was about, I think it was around 10 yards, 10 or 11 yards. Jadarian Price ran hard, kept it between the tackles. Any further thoughts on the what we saw from the running backs on Saturday?
No, I think it would be really just to reiterate that I thought this would be a time where Price could potentially revert to some bad habits, like the line isn't doing a good job. Let me try and make plays. And even if it wasn't looking good and he was getting 1 or 2 yards and just kind of running into the line because there's no holes, I think that's probably what you'd rather him be doing at this point in time rather than bouncing stuff outside and not looking good. And I also thought he did some good things in the passing game. No like huge explosive plays, but he did a little more than just check down. He actually ran out of the backfield and made a couple plays running actual routes. I felt like just like quick outs and stuff like that. But no, and I agree. I think Williams also impressive that he just ran hard. Like he had one of the two touchdowns, I think, of the day, and it was. I mean, he just kind of had to barely get over the line and take a pretty good hit, and I thought that was encouraging.
John, further thoughts on the running backs?
Yeah, I thought Williams, to Pete's point, his frame just looks better. He looks like he's trimmed down, but also added some power. He looked more streamlined when he did get going. I think it was Drew and I talked about how Kedron Young still kind of you can see he's looking for contact. He doesn't mind to absorb contact or to have the opportunity to take someone on. And then a really good point on Jadarian Price not reverting to his bad habits. And a matter of fact, he's been so impressive this spring that when we talked to Kedron Young, he was talking to me about how he actually had been studying Jadarian and working with him in the last couple of months about being more decisive and about just putting a foot in the ground, making your cut, and getting north and south. And he said that Jadarian was actually helping him a great deal in that regard.
Yeah, I thought I made this comment, Drew. I know you heard it when Kedron Young, when they're first starting practice and they're in positional drills, just running, getting the paces and getting loosened up. They hand the ball in, it's against air. They hand the ball to the other guys and they want to juke, and Keedron Young just hits the hole, and I think he's got some wiggle. We've seen it before, but I think that's a good habit for him to create for himself, that he's a power back and he needs to hit it up in there. And if you get past that first wave, you can use a little bit of wiggle, but I think he understands what he's doing. The problem, however, on Saturday was the offensive lines that they were running behind. The number one offensive line from right to left was Matty Augustine, um, Charles Jagus, Joe Otting, Sullivan Absher, and
It was Styles Prescott.
it was Styles Prescott. Thank you very much. I'm looking at a number and it doesn't come to mind right away. And
That's
then
a problem.
Yeah, because we have not seen a whole bunch of number 71. But then from right to left, number 2 was Strebig and Houston, the converted defensive lineman, Cam Herron at center, Peter Jones, and Robbie Wallen, the walk on. So I mean, it was really difficult to evaluate the running game with those offensive lines, and nothing against the individuals there, but there's no cohesion whatsoever. And so it made it difficult. And then, as we said on Saturday numerous times, it was, although Marcus Freeman downplayed the impact that the offensive lines had on the quarterbacks, it had an impact. The guy that handled it the best was CJ Carr in the last throw of the day when he was getting overwhelmed by about 6 guys. I'd have to see the replay, and he was backpedaling, and he threw a strike to Elijah Burris in the end zone. But other than that, man, really difficult to evaluate what the offensive line is banged up, and not all of it is. We have a question in the second segment about, are they going to be able to find cohesion? Not all these guys are in really bad physical condition. They're just being careful with guys like Emil Wagner that had 990 snaps in the fall.
Yeah, it's like if I was Matty Augustin or Styles Prescott, I'd be like, Emil, you could take a rep, or Owen Strebig against Bryce Young later in the practice of like, Emil,
Yeah.
why don't you hop in here, Chief, and take a rep, because it's just I 100% disagree with Marcus about like it shouldn't affect or doesn't affect your evaluation of the
We felt the
quarterback.
same way, by the way.
Because, like, look, if you plan to play a style of offense where your quarterback is running for your life all season, then I guess. But that's not what this offensive line should be. So, and I think you guys made this point over the weekend of like, of all of you, the 3 quarterbacks, who's going to handle pressure the worst athletically? It's Angeli. So I think that kind of put him at a little bit of a disadvantage, which is it's just worth noting. I'm not saying it is the end all be all of the day.
Yeah, I think when Angeli, like he ran one time, and we've seen him run before. He ran against Purdue. He can be quick when he's moving forward. I think the differentiation between him and the other 2 guys, those guys are better. And we've seen him struggle in the pass rush. Those guys are better when they have to evade, laterally, or moving backwards and then work their way back into to working their way up the field. The other guys are just a little bit more mobile. It's Angeli that when he was in the back pedal or being pressured, that doesn't have the same elusiveness that those guys do.
I'm very stunned that, Pete, you seem not to think that the jailbreak offense with all hot routes is a viable, sustainable game plan for the entire 12 to 16 game season in the fall.
I just don't. I mean, they tried that at Miami in 2017. It didn't work.
Yeah, that's not a good plan. That's not a good plan of action. Real quickly, finishing up with offense here in segment 1. The receivers. I do want to say this, and Pete, I know you listed the guys that you were impressed with on Twitter immediately afterwards, and Burris caught the deep ball. He had some drops along the way during drills, etc. But the fact that I think we said this at some point over the weekend, the fact that, I mean, Burris was targeted more than anybody, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and that's like the deep ball was great at the end. It was a nice catch. It was a better throw, but it was a good catch. But the fact that the staff is giving him the run that they gave him, and the quarterbacks are looking for him, that's noteworthy to me. It's like when you always do this after open practices, and not everyone impresses you in the same way. Burris impressed me by the amount of reps he was getting.
Yeah.
Like if you just like, okay, let's add up Saldate, Scrap Richardson,
Cam
Cam
Williams.
Williams. I know Micah Gilbert is out. Like basically, KK Smith, I guess you could throw every receiver who was not Greathouse or Faison, who wasn't even there. But like Burris made more plays than the other guys all put together. I know, and I know he had a drop on that comeback by the sideline, but
Yeah, that was a really
there was
bad drop, but
there was
yeah.
just enough there where you're like, okay, this is going to happen for him.
Yeah, I thought it was even noteworthy though on that drop is I thought that was a really nice route. Like he kind of came up and got open at the end. Like it was, and then I think it was near the sideline, and I think he was trying to keep his feet in bounds, and he kind of took his eye off the ball or something. But I think even on that play, you could potentially for a kid who should still be in high school, there were some positives even to glean from
Yeah.
his biggest mistake of the day.
That was a Minchie throw, if I'm correct on that. That was a beautiful throw. There's no doubt about that. And we had some argument, JB, about because we're hearing what after Saturday, we have people on our message board saying, well, the other site said this and that. One site said the Cam Williams drop was not his fault. It was behind him and on his hip. My perspective on that is he's Cam Williams and he's got to make plays. And it's a
Yeah.
tough, I mean, everybody, of course, it's a tough play. But if anybody out there needs to make a big play, a good play, a tough catch, it's Cam Williams who has the most ground to make up.
I would contend that there isn't a coach on the Notre Dame staff that wouldn't have said or that would say Cam Williams should not have caught that
Yeah.
ball.
I mean, it hit his hands, it hit his hip.
Right. Steve Angeli could have absolutely thrown a better ball, which we outlined, and he could have thrown a more leading ball that Cam Williams probably would have turned into a touchdown because he was behind Cree Thomas, I believe it was, who was in coverage on that deep in route, deep slant, whatever you want to call it. He was cutting across the middle. If Angeli hits him in stride, he's got momentum. He's pulling away from Cree Thomas, and it's going to be a 50-yard touchdown. But it was a drop, and it was not so behind him that he had to come to a dead stop and that Cree
Right.
Thomas ran over him. It was still on a moving target, just to his hip. Not even low enough that he had to necessarily bend down at the waist. It was just at his waist, but a very, very catchable ball. And you live with that play in a game if you're Notre Dame and you expect it to be executed. If it's 100% the same, Notre Dame would still tell you it expects that play to be executed.
Yeah. Before we move on to the defense, Xavier Southall, who's a walk-on, who I covered his dad, Corny Southall, way back when. He had a low throw on the move where he had to reach down and while still running, made the grab. Okay, well, that's a ball that he shouldn't have caught, but he did. And that was my whole point. Real quickly, wrapping up segment 2, the defense, Pete, John and Drew and I were in accordance after the scrimmage on Saturday that we thought Jason Onye really impressed. You can see he's bigger, he's very physical. When he keeps his pad level down, he's a handful in there with, suddenly, and I want your perspective on this, the interior defensive line that, when you lose 2 starters of the magnitude that Notre Dame did in Cross and Mills, you think, wow, that's going to be a problem. Maybe that group is coming together, and we thought Onye played really well.
I did too, and I think I wrote this after the fact. Like, have we overstated the drop off that there's going to be a D tackle based on Saturday? Probably. It looked like more than a serviceable or competent group. I mean, it looked like a good group. Like, even though Heinisch wasn't out there, he's sort of established at this point. Like, if those are your 5, like I thought Dawson and Elijah Hughes did some good things again against a not great offensive line, but shoot, if I think when Onye came back, I'm thinking more, okay, can he be your 3rd or 4th guy? He's been out of football for, I don't know, 6 months, 4 months. And now you're walking him and thinking like, well, can Onye come back and be, one of your starters? And that to add a starting defensive tackle to your roster on top of Dawson and Hughes, like that's a significant roster move right there that you made by getting a guy back with your program.
And John, to follow up on Pete saying there, even if Onye doesn't start, which I got to believe that Jared Dawson's in the starting lineup, if when Jason Onye comes into the game off the bench and your first reaction is, okay, Onye's in, that's good, he's going to be productive. it doesn't matter whether he starts. If you have that if he can play like we thought we saw him play on Saturday with that additional size, I think it's 17 pounds. And then, plus everything that he went through, he's extremely motivated to be a guy that Notre Dame can count on game after game after game.
Yeah, and I think we heard Al Washington say that Jason Onye can be a starter, that he considers him a starter. And so, yeah, they brought those other guys in out of the portal, but they brought RJ Oben in out of the portal last year too, and he didn't start or play the lion's share of snaps as the season wore on, and he was ineffective. So I don't think they're in the business of guaranteeing, and I think that yeah, they can. I think Rubio and Onye could be your starting tandem. I think that we went into the offseason, understandably, after you lose two guys with various All-America credentials, thinking that, wow, the defensive interior is a huge question mark for Notre Dame, and it's not a huge question mark for Notre Dame anymore, and they've gotten significantly bigger. And I've talked before about Notre Dame's need to have more stature along its defensive interior, and now you've got two different guys, bless you, TP, who are both 6'5", and Onye at 308, and Rubio at 319. That's a gain of 2 or 4 pounds for Rubio over last year. As you noted, that's not quite a 20-pound gain for Onye, but it's a significant one, especially with how much stronger he looks in upper body strength. And I would just remind you that Howard Cross was 288 last year, or that's what he was listed at. He was rarely healthy. He was listed in around that 6'1", 6'1" height, or somewhere right around there. So, and now you've got two 6'5" guys. So I just think that, yeah, Notre Dame has a chance to not only not have a magnificent drop off at the defensive interior, but yes, I do think Notre Dame could be better on its interior this fall. The way those two guys look and the quality of depth that Notre Dame has assembled. And I thought he didn't play a lot, but Sean Sevillano, I thought, had a couple of good individual reps when they were doing some one-on-ones. We didn't get to see him, or I didn't notice him standing out a whole lot during the 60 or so live scrimmage plays. There was one play he got really nice penetration, but wasn't involved in the play. But yeah, I do think, as I've said before, there's prospects and not just suspects at the defensive tackle spot.
As we wrap up this first segment on defense, Drew, I want to throw it to you. Looking on the back end, I think we all were. There were moments for Jalen Sneed. We've heard about him being up to 235. He could be, well, he's a starter right now, and so he could be an integral part of what they do. They need him. When you talk about how you enhance, how about a totally locked in 235-pound Jalen Sneed? I think that can take them a long way. And then real quickly, Drew, on the back end, there's some young DBs back there. Tay Johnson, I think, flashed for us. Kennedy Urlacher certainly did. You want to talk about that for a little bit as we head into segment 2?
Yeah, I think afterwards, Marcus Freeman during his press conference talked about how, it's really hard to replace a guy like Xavier Watts. I mean, there's so much consistency there. There's so much trust there. Obviously, we saw the playmaking over the last 2 years, but you have a lot of different skill sets and body types there that they're really flashed in different ways. And I'm not sure how it's all going to work out, but yeah, Tay Johnson is another really long athlete. Kenny Urlacher is a hard-hitting guy who's willing to come up and make plays. You have a lot of different skill sets and a lot of things that are really valuable. And while you lose a guy like Xavier Watts, you add a bunch of you have a lot of different talent emerging that maybe there isn't one player who's going to be able to equal Xavier Watts, but they have a lot of options, and maybe they can kind of piece things together if guys can prove they're trustworthy.
Yeah, I thought Carson Hobbs showed some things playing some number one nickel. Luke Telich is certainly involved there, but it was encouraging. We do have a question in second segment on Tay Johnson. We'll talk about him a little bit more when we get to segment 2. Looking to upgrade your wardrobe, founded by ND alum Ga Wang, you've seen ESQ's custom clothing on the player walk and all of your favorite players and coaches. With more than a decade of making the best bespoke clothing available, ESQ will help you look and feel your best, from a perfect fitting suit or sport coat, shirt or bomber jacket, or that perfect tuxedo for wedding season. Check out esqclothing.com and book an appointment to upgrade your wardrobe today. Mention Irish Illustrated and get 10% off your entire purchase. That's esqclothing.com. Moving on to segment 2, burning up the boards. Burning up the boards is segment 2. We start with a question from Denver Maximus. After 3 weeks, it appears there is no clear front runner for the starting quarterback position. If Notre Dame closes spring with no obvious front runner or quarterback, do you see them dipping into the spring portal for a quarterback? I know Notre Dame wants to build a multi-year starter, but if there is a question about all three that they feel won't be answered by fall, do you see them taking a quarterback who can enhance the team and their chances for another playoff run?
No, I don't. I don't see Notre Dame going into the spring portal whatsoever, just because they're not telling us right now who the starter is or giving us access to all the data points, and they have more data points than ever before now that they're able to study, especially with an all-new director of analytics that didn't exist. That position didn't exist at Notre Dame for spring camp 2024. So they have even more data points that they are able to examine. But the good quarterbacks are the ones that you would think could lead a Notre Dame if you're in that position again. We're in the last transfer portal. There's not going to be a quarterback, in my opinion, whatsoever in the April portal that opens in 9 days or so, April 16th through the 25th. There's not going to be a guy in that portal that could take Notre Dame back to the playoffs in the fall.
Yeah, I was gonna say unless Arch Manning is like begging to come to the game or somebody like that, I don't know why you would even consider that possibility. I mean, I feel like that would be pretty disheartening to the room, especially after, as we talked about in segment one, like these guys are standing out in their own ways too. This isn't a couple years ago where it's like, why haven't they named Tyler Buckner over Drew Pine yet or something like that? Like we're pretty there's a lot of talent and honestly, I don't think there's a reason to be disappointed with whoever will win this job of this three. It's just about seeing who kind of fully separates himself, which, based on what Marcus Freeman said on Saturday, no one's really made that decision for them yet.
If anyone was added to the portal, it would have to be like a backup, and even that is a stretch, and which is not helping you make the playoff, which is the point of the question. So they've got three quarterbacks I think they believe that they can win with. It's not like Pine and Buckner, like Drew pointed out. So no, if they went to the portal, I would, man, I would have some huge questions about how this whole thing's being operated.
Yeah, that would not be well received. By the way, Drew Pine heading to Bowling Green for his fourth team in college football. Did you guys see that?
I
I
did
can't
see
believe
that.
he still has 2 years of eligibility
Yeah,
left.
I don't
I
understand.
don't mind that he's going to Bowling Green. Good. I like Eddie George a lot. But holy smokes, 2 years left? Are you kidding me?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I'm surprised. He enrolled in like 2014. I don't understand it. Anyway, moving on. A question from Jim Bob Cooter 55. If Kenny Minchie wins his quarterback job, what in the world would happen to the quarterback room in the fall? Who's the backup? Does CJ Carr transfer? It would be a crazy turn of events and something most people, including myself, didn't see. I thought Kenny Minchie looked pretty darn good Saturday until the interception.
I'm with Jim Bob Cooter 55 here. It would be something that I wouldn't have seen coming. And I still think it's going to be Carr or Angeli, but Minchie was pretty good on Saturday. So what would that mean for the? I mean, could all three stay still? I guess it's like my speculative mind thinks that the only guy that would for sure leave if he didn't win the job was Angeli. In part because he's the only guy that could leave if he didn't win the job, um, likely as a grad transfer, whereas the other guys would sort of be stuck. So it, I'll be, I'll be interested to sort of see how Marcus handles this with the staff. I mean, he's talked about how, hey, the players are smart, they know where they stand. Similarly, and I think back to the Hartman Buckner from a couple years ago, like, duh, we all knew who the starting quarterback was going to be. If the other practices looked like the one that we saw Saturday, I don't know if any of the quarterbacks would sit there and say, like, I'm first, but I don't think any of them would sit there and say that I'm third either. So I wonder if that kind of muddies the waters a little bit in terms of roster movement.
Yeah, I mean, just for the sakes of this hypothetical scenario posed here, yes, if Kenny Minchie was deemed the starter at the end of spring or sometime this month, yes, I think that means Steve Angeli would transfer. I think CJ Carr would transfer or would not transfer because he would be the backup in that scenario, one play away from starting, and I think he would still, in his mind, be competing and think he would take the job. But Kenny Minchie's got a more advanced calendar and could transfer in the spring and be ready to rock and roll. So I don't see that happening. But again, I don't think any of those guys has eliminated himself from contention.
Yeah, I mean, especially, I guess I'd be curious, well, again, with this hypothetical, like it's hard to see based on what we've seen them making a decision at the end of the spring, unless somebody's like, I need to be named the starter or I'm gone type of thing, or I need a decision. So if this drags out into the fall and then Kenny Minchie leads it, I think that would be pretty curious. I could honestly see all of them staying in that scenario, especially since they're would be no reason, for instance, like Steve Angeli being the backup next fall or whatever. And then, I mean, if he plays in 5 or 6 games or whatnot, like he doesn't, it's not like he's trying to preserve a red shirt or anything like that. And then he could find the ideal situation for him after that. I'd be curious, and unless he has a place lined up that he can jump to if he doesn't win the job in the fall.
I feel
It
like
would be hard to find a place to go that would be a better situation all of a sudden.
I feel like there's on the outside looking in, there's rooting interest. I would not necessarily rooting against some guys, but I mean, people want a clear demarcation. The fact that all three played reasonably to very, well on Saturday, I think is a good thing. That's not a bad thing. And I like cheering factions. What do you think if there was a breakdown of percentage? Cheering factions, Carr would probably be number one from a fan perspective, then Angeli, and then Minchie. Do you think? I mean, is that about right?
I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would just be how high is the percentage on car? 85%? 90%?
Uh,
Like,
I don't know. I'm basing it on the kind of feedback we get on Four Horsemen Lounge. I think it's a little bit higher for Angeli than what you're saying there, Pete. But I think clear because look, how many times have we said it? The ceiling is higher for him. I stand by that. And so that's the guy that people want to hit the ground running with. But the fact that again, a scrimmage on April 5th and all three of them play, you know what? They all played reasonably well, and there's a legitimate competition. That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing for a football team, but we have a tendency to look at it a little bit differently when you have rooting interest for guys. We have a question from Wheeler Howe 85. With so many offensive linemen out, do you have concerns about cohesion heading into the season? It seems like even with a full offseason, it takes good O-lines a few games to get rolling.
Well, if those guys were out and it was a year ago where they were all coming into a situation with relatively no experience or no significant experience other than Ashton Craig having commanded the center spot for the final 3 or 4 games of 23, then your concern would be a lot greater. But the fact is, Wagner's still out at practice every day. He's still around those guys. They're all still spending a lot of time together. I've seen Shrouth and Ashton Craig out on the practice field numerous times around the offensive line drills, around their teammates at that position. They've played ball together. So no, like it's suboptimum for them all to be out this spring, but I don't anticipate it being a dramatic impact in the fall from a chemistry standpoint, especially and as long as you get all those guys back that you view as your starters or your top seven, and they're able to go over the balance of August leading into that opener that Sunday night at Miami.
I mean, look, it's a concern, but every offensive line, even the ones that return everybody, usually need a game or two or three to sort of like get it
Yeah,
all together.
those
But
first two are those are hard ones to
yeah, I know
get it
it's
all together.
you're really rolling the dice on these first two games. But I don't know. There's just not a lot Notre Dame can do about it. You can't uninjure Shrouth or Knapp. You can't uninjure Ashton Craig. So maybe you change up the format of fall camp to try to promote this a little bit more in terms of the reps you give the starting offensive line versus the backups or the threes. I think that's probably a reasonable thing for Marcus Freeman to look at and say like, okay, we got to go about this a different way. But if I was Joe Rudolph, I would sort of look at the spring practice and be like, this is more like OTAs than it is spring ball in some ways. Like he's just sort of making the best of what he's got, which is not a college football playoff level offensive line.
Yeah, I agree it's not ideal in how you want to draw it up, but I think it is good, like I guess revisiting the fact that I mean, Joe Rudolph talked about it when we met with him a few weeks ago that like in a normal year you play a bowl game and then you go to spring ball a few months later. This year they had a bowl game, then 21 practices and three more games. And I know, not all like Knapp wasn't available for the last week, so he wasn't available for all of it. But a lot of these guys got a lot of extra work and experience that they wouldn't have had in the past years, yeah, again, why you would rather have them available and working together right now, and I think that would help the quarterback battle and some other things like that. I think these guys, part of the reason they're out is because they got so much extra work this year too.
And
That's a,
not the, oh, sorry.
no, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, and not the offensive line in reference to this specific player. A great point from Drew, but I was noticing the other day, Drake Bowen's next appearance will be his 29th game. The guy is going into his true junior season, and he's already played almost 30 games. Think about that. It's not that long ago that 30 games played meant you were starting your final senior year of college football. And Drake Bowen is on the cusp of his true junior year, almost at 30 career games played. And I'm sure there are a couple of juniors on the roster who are entering this year with getting ready to make their 30th career appearance when that season opens against Miami. So there is a lot of I call it microwaved experience, and they microwaved a whole third of a season with that playoff run.
I think Wheeler Howe 85 has a legitimate question, but I think it needs a little bit of perspective. Emil Wagner is part of the monitored workload group because he did take those 990 snaps. Anthony Knapp and Billy Schrouther on the modified activity. So they're getting, it's difficult for us to say what they're getting in practice, but it's not like they're completely sidelined. They're moving around, and then Ashton Craig is moving around too. So I get it, but it's not as dire as I guess we make it sound when we start reading off first and second team offensive line in the spring, because a lot of this is built in to just get these guys. Billy Schroff does not need a huge amount of snaps during the spring. What he needs is to get completely healthy so he can have a June and July where he's full go, getting his physically prepared, conditioning wise, strength wise, et cetera, with all these guys. So, I get the question, but it's probably not quite as dire as it sounds when we're talking about who's first and second team. We have a question from Martin Evenflow. While fans speculated that Gerby Lambert would start at one of the tackle spots, his injury could throw a wrench into those plans. Does Anthony Knapp now remain at left tackle? Does Charles Jagusa kick back out again? Could Will Black pull a Joe Alt? It feels like Joe Rudolph will have to play Tetris again. Jerry?
I mean,
Yeah.
it's an interesting question because, like, I have been more in the Jagasaw should play left tackle camp than maybe some other people, and I think Knapp should play inside. So if Lambert is like out for longer than Marcus Freeman indicated he would be, which he said he'd essentially be back for the season. But if we just remove Lambert from consideration here, I would go with Jagasaw at left tackle, and then I would play Knapp inside. But I'm not saying that's not a like you should definitely do this or definitely not. I just think Jagasaw has potential to be an awesome, awesome left tackle, and I think Knapp is built more like an interior offensive lineman than he is an edge player.
Yeah, I think I, for a long time, agreed with you on this, Pete. And I think more recently, maybe more so based on what I think they're going to do, is I'm kind of starting to think based on what Joe Rudolph has said that they're going to keep Knapp at left tackle. I mean, I feel like even last fall after Knapp was starting there, he would kind of indicate, well, we've always seen him better as inside, but I feel like he had a quote this spring kind of qualifying, like coming in, we thought he would fit more like internal positions, but he's so natural playing out there and he has really good length. The average tackle in the NFL is 6'5", 6'8" is the outlier. So I feel like his perspective has kind of changed more on where Knapp can do and fit in. And even though I think looking at Jagasaw, you'd think he makes more sense at tackle, but he's also said, I think he could be one of the best left tackles in the nation, or as good as anybody. So I think just trying to read based on the quotes that he given us, and maybe that changed 2 days later. Who knows? But just reading his words, it kind of seems like that might be where he's leaning towards right now.
And we saw Sullivan Absher have to start at left guard on Saturday in the scrimmage work again because those depleted numbers. But he came in with tackle projection, and he's 6'8", and so you wonder if they're working Sullivan Absher some at left tackle on the days that we're not there. I would agree that it would make a lot of sense to kick Jagasaw back out to left tackle and let Knapp try to come back on the interior, or Absher at right guard and Billy Schrouth at left guard. But I do know Notre Dame is very intent and believes it can have an extremely dominant guard, center guard trio up there if they're able to keep Jagasaw at right guard, get Ashton Craig back, and then get Billy Schroff back so that would be your right, center, and left guards there. I don't see a Will Black scenario as gifted and as talented as he is, and as much as Notre Dame coveted Black as the number one prospect on their board at the tackle position. The fact that he's not here right now, I certainly don't see him being a guy who arrives in June and is starting 8 weeks later.
Yeah, we've kind of gotten spoiled in recent years about true freshman offensive linemen. It's clearly the exception to the rule, but it's happened a lot here recently. Look, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer right now. I always talk about Charles Jagusa being a guard, and he is. I think he will be on the next level, but that doesn't mean he can't be a very effective left tackle for Notre Dame. And like you said, Drew, when Joe Rudolph says he could be one of the best in the country, I get that. There's no right or wrong answer. I mean, is Knapp, like Pete, you said, Knapp, all things being equal, is probably a better fit inside, but he just started 15 games at left tackle. The long term for Jagusa is inside, in my opinion. He certainly can be a quality, left tackle. I agree with you, JB. I think, Will Black, I mean, if he comes in, he's Joe Alt, okay, well, that's that complicates things a little bit, but that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. I don't think that there are particularly right or wrong answers with this, because Notre Dame's got a ton of good offensive linemen, including Sullivan Absher, who could fit the equation. I just think it's a damn shame that this happened to Gerby Lambert, because is he going to be ready for the season? Sure. But what he's going to miss in the next 3 or 4 months is time that he can't get back. And that's going to make it difficult for him to make a significant impact, especially out of the gate in 2025. Question from NDI Man. Predict who gets more snaps in 2025. We'll go by each pairing here, guys. Jason Onye or Gabe Rubio?
Rubio.
Yeah, I think it'll be Rubio.
I wrote down Anye. That's kind of just projecting. Looking back on their past snaps, I think they're all pretty similar, except for the time both of them missed last year. So I think that's a good either or could work, but
yeah, there's talent in there. The two transfers in there are going to make an impact as well. I would choose Rubio too. I don't want to base everything upon one scrimmage that we saw, and all of a sudden Onye's better than Rubio. I mean, Rubio is the guy that is the projected starter. He hasn't done anything wrong. Onye just made some plays on Saturday that had us hype him up a little bit. How about Josh Burnham or Bryce Young? Drew, who do you got there?
I still think it will be Josh Burnham. Just I'm more confident in his ability to play all 3 downs. But I mean, and Bryce Young, if he's still staying, with Botello and Boubacar, maybe that they're rotating a little more. But I mean, I also could see Bryce Young turning into like a potential All-American too and being totally wrong. So I'm gonna pick Burnham for now.
I think Burnham is underrated, which is great. I think that Bryce Young is properly rated as freaking ridiculous. So I'll go with the guy who's I think is freaking ridiculous with BY, because I think also there's like Burnham might play in third and long. Bryce Young ain't coming off the field, so you got those snaps you got to factor into.
Bryce Young, and my cheating element to picking Bryce Young is let's not forget how much this staff likes Bryce Young's potential to block field goals. So whether it's field goal attempts or extra points, he's going to get some good snaps there, trying to help impact the game for Notre Dame on special teams. So I'm going Bryce Young because he's a freakazoid, and it's just a matter of time before he blocks more kicks on punts, PATs, field goals, what have you.
Yeah, the point being that I think I agree with you. I think Bryce Young stays on the field in passing situations, and maybe they bump him inside because they have come so far at the defensive end position. But Pete, I tend to agree with you. I think Josh Burnham is underrated. We see how much how they want him on the field. It seems like they want Josh Burnham on the field a lot, and that speaks volumes about Burnham. How about it gets a little more complicated here. Jordan Botello or Boubacar Traore?
I mean, my feeling is Trier is ahead in his recovery. My feeling is also Trier is a better player. So I'm going to go Trier there on both counts.
I'm gonna
Yeah.
keep being a little bit of a contrarian, and I wrote down Botello. Just I was really impressed. I mean, we didn't see much of him last year, but I thought he was making plays in the run game and doing a lot of different things. And um, I I guess he got injured a little earlier, so maybe that helps with his ultimate recovery, but not necessarily. So I think again, these are all pretty tough and pretty similar potential amount of snaps.
Yeah, I'll go Traore, just because it does sound like he's maybe, even though injured a couple of weeks after. But Botello, we've heard really great things about where he is in his recovery process and where he projects to be, and the fact that once again I could see Traore being a weapon on kickoff coverage or something like that, in addition to his defensive role.
Pete, I feel like Botello's ahead of Traore.
Oh,
What?
that was based on my conversation with Trier back in Atlanta, um, where Trier was like, I might be ready by the end of April, which is coming up. But, I think in some ways, like if they're both back for summer conditioning, then it's maybe a draw.
Yeah, I mean both. Rob Hunt said for both of them unrestricted for the summer,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so that's
I
really
thought,
key.
but I remember speaking at one of those playoff game sites, and Traore thought that he was going to be able to start cutting it loose in May. Now, whether the trainers allow him to do that or not is a different story, and we know he's supposed to be unrestricted by June when the summer conditioning begins. But yeah, that's why I was
Yeah,
nodding my head in agreement
I
with Pete, because yeah,
Rob Hunt said about Botello that he was killing his rehab.
yeah.
So I think that's what's swayed me here. A couple more guys: Logan Saldate or Micah Gilbert.
This is a tough one because I want it to be Gilbert, which is kind of a weird way to answer it. Because I just think his skill set is something that Notre Dame doesn't have enough of with like the physicality part of it. Um, and I guess we'll see what they do at the slot because that again, that position subs out when you go to two tight ends. Jaden Greathouse is there. Will Pauling played a little bit on Saturday, which I guess I was kind of hoping Will Pauling would be more of like a field receiver. Um, so I wonder how many snaps are available for Saldate.
Yeah, I'm going Micah Gilbert. That's my pick there.
Yeah, I
Drew.
think Gilbert makes more sense. I've been pretty impressed with what I've seen from Saldate though. Just I mean, I like how he's kind of just seems like he's a pretty like explosive, agile cutter, and I would think it'd be interesting if they could get him on the field. But I agree that the path seems more crowded there.
Yeah, Drew, you and I reacted the exact same way at the exact same time when we saw Saldate come off the line of scrimmage on one snap. He is very quick, but Gilbert's a W, and Malachi Fields will be out there, and then your third one is Cam Williams, who hasn't come along. I mean, in accordance with what you're saying, Pete, I think Notre Dame needs Micah Gilbert to step forward, and then they do more than they do with Saldate. KVA or Jalen Sneed? Max Bulla does a great job of distributing snaps. He did a great job last year.
Yeah, I mean, for even though KVA was only hurt for was hurt for a little bit last year. He only played about 90 fewer snaps than Snead last year as a freshman still. And I know hearing a lot of good things about Jalen Snead. He did look great on Saturday, and I'm still going to go with KVA though. I think I feel I would trust him at this point more for that to like work out in the long run. And he's, I mean, either way, you're dealing with borderline 5-star talents there. So.
I
Yeah.
think reliability is why KVA is the answer to this question. Snead very volatile over the course of the previous 3 years. KVA has been here for 1 year and seems to be like locked in, consistent, future captain type of guy. So I'm going to go with KVA on this one.
Yeah, I was going to say we heard Marcus Freeman say that Jalen Snead has emphatically had his best spring ever of his entire time at Notre Dame. We also heard Max Bulla repeatedly call KVA a pro, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm going to go with the guy that is just barely entering his sophomore year and already being resoundingly dubbed a pro.
And then last one, Minchie or Carr? One word.
Carr.
Or
Moving on to a question from Wash ND. Before spring, the prevailing thought was that Luke Telich or Jalen Stroman would be starting at safety. But do we need to start looking at Tay Johnson, potentially pulling a 2024 Don Schuler and just taking the job with his play? His name has been buzzing all spring, much like Schuler last year. I would suggest that his name has been buzzing since Saturday. I know that his name has come up on occasion, but Saturday swayed everything. He looked good. I mean, he looked good. Jalen Stroman will knock you into next week. So I mean, do not give up on Jalen Stroman just because he's recovering he is a very physical player. It's going to be a good competition. I think Tay Johnson comes off the bench and maybe works in, but now we're talking about, do they go 4 deep if Tellis is involved as well?
I think Tay Johnson is probably making the move from a guy on the roster to a player. That's a significant move, regardless of how many snaps he plays this year, because a year from now, Jalen Stroman won't be here. Don Schuler might not be here. And so you need Tay Johnson to make a move eventually. The fact that he's doing it now it's a real positive, regardless of how much he plays this season.
John, I say this frequently, body language is important. Love Tay Johnson's body language on Saturday.
A lot of confidence, and I think that's one of the things you're alluding to. You could see with his body language, he not only was confident out there, but he felt like he knew what to do. He felt comfortable. He was flying to the football. He looked good. I wouldn't discount Luke Talich in that scenario because I alluded to last week. We've heard so much about how well he communicates the good things he's doing. He's 6'4". He's right at 217 pounds. He's long. He's lanky. He's played high school quarterback. He's a coach's son. He knows what to do. Maybe he's not quite the athlete Tay Johnson is, but he does some nice things as well. So we've talked about it before, the depth and the talent in the Notre Dame secondary, and that extends from the DB spots to the safety is very enviable right now for the Irish. And I would quickly flip back, TP, and say you didn't answer the Carr or Minchie question with one word.
Carr.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think for this scenario, I'd be a little curious too, just based on like last year, I think maybe it was a little easier to also go with Schuler. Obviously, I feel like he earned it, but you're putting him next to Xavier Watts, who's a fifth-year guy, a captain, and even for as impressive as Schuler is, he's still a junior. He's only played one season where he was really in the rotation. It'd be a little harder to go with the Tay Johnson who missed part of last year, unproven guy. So I wonder if Stroman kind of gets more of an advantage because you don't want to you want the most experience out there too. And Freeman really talked a lot about the importance of like trust and things like that. And that might be a little harder to feel comfortable with a couple younger guys out there than Xavier Watts, who you have all the faith in the world in.
Here's somewhat of a quick hitter. Air Pirate 73. Now that you guys have seen a full scrimmage with improved strength and conditioning, size, etc., each of you pick 2 players on offense and 2 players on defense who will be your choices for the, quote, first guy off the bus. It doesn't have to be 2. Anybody that comes to mind, guys.
Bryce Young and Charles Jagasaw. Jeremiah Love, because everybody in college football knows Jeremiah Love, and I want him striking fear from the moment he steps off the bus. So those are my first three, and then probably Jason Onye is number four.
Those have been all my picks. Yeah,
Copycat.
you can't go along with defensive linemen and offensive linemen, and then potentially one of the best running backs in college football.
Yeah, I wrote down a lot of those names. I also think Kedron Young, if you're talking about purely just physical, I mean he's pretty intimidating looking. I think KVA also. I mean he's 6'3", nearly 400 pounds. Like he's pretty imposing. And then he's not here yet, so I guess he doesn't totally fit this question. But I would be curious to see what Malachi Fields looks like at 6'4", 225 or whatever he is too.
I think Onye is a pretty easy pick, isn't he? I mean, especially now that he's put some weight on, and Jalen Sneed, who's always been an impressive looking athlete, now that he's up to 235. Um, always been easy. It's always been easy to impress with him as the first guy off the bench. I said off the bench, I mean off the bus. We'll go to a question from Dr. Parnell 42. Since Pete Sampson showed this weekend his ability to write in Spanish, will he be writing articles in Spanish for the Spanish speaking fans? You want to give a little background on that, Pete Sampson?
Baxter, I don't speak Spanish. That is purely a somebody on your message board said that I was posting practice updates from Mexico in previous years, which I was like, that would be impossible and sad at the same time if I was doing that on my vacation. So I wanted to kind of make fun of that person. So that was why I responded to in Spanish. I wanted to know what year he was talking about.
Moving on to Statman 72. Oh, I'm sorry. The Salty Jazz 14. Who is your personal favorite Notre Dame 2026 commit and why?
I mean, it's got to be Ebenezer Ewatade, right? Like, not to just rely on recency bias here, but I know he's listed at 6'4", 221, and he looks like he's about 6'6", 221. So I like that body type to work with if you're Notre Dame.
I'll go.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Drew. Just real quickly, I'll go Thomas Davis Jr. because you get a Georgia legacy player, and he committed so long ago, and he obviously has the genes to be really good. And you're taking him out of Charlotte, where you're continuing to recruit well if you're North Carolina or if you're Notre Dame going into the Carolinas, and again see the Georgia legacy factor.
Yeah, I agree with Pete. I encourage everybody to check out the stories, the film review Priest wrote on IrishIllustrated.com. Brian also wrote an interesting opinion piece on him. I think there's a lot of things that if you kind of learn more about him, that he's a pretty intriguing prospect for a variety of reasons. And I think we've seen Notre Dame do well with kind of raw prospects from defensive end, specifically from North Carolina, that they've kind of helped mold once they get to campus too.
I'm going to cheat on this answer, and I'm going to post date this answer to Thursday, April 10th, when Rodney Dunham is supposed to announce his choice of schools. I think it's going to be Notre Dame. A lot of people think it's going to be Notre Dame, which is why I think it's going to be Notre Dame. He would move to the front of the pack, but Iwatade is that's a very impressive individual who is just learning how to play football. It's really, really impressive to see and know that he is just growing into his body. It was just a couple of years ago. He was a 180-pound wide receiver that his head coach and defensive line coach said, let's take a look at you with a couple snaps off the edge. And it didn't take more than a couple for them to realize that he had great potential. And when he realized it, he's really taken off. So he's been very impressive. We have a question from Statman72. Coogan, Spindler, and Pendleton transferred because they were seeking more playing time and most likely more NIL money. Do you have any sense whether any of them could have been enticed to stay had Notre Dame offered more money, or were they so focused on playing time that reasonable differences in money didn't matter?
Yeah, I think it was primarily playing time because none of those guys was going to be promised anything in terms of playing time in 2025. And I talked to my folks down at Tennessee. I had a coaching friend who has been at multiple of their practices, and this shocked me. But he says, as of right now, Pendleton is not running with the ones at Tennessee. He's been consistently with the twos at guard along the offensive front for the Vols this spring, and they scrimmaged this morning, actually. So I don't think it was NIL money. I think it was looking at the room, and those guys would have been playing a lot of ball this spring if they were healthy. That doesn't mean anything for the fall.
Yeah, Saturday would have looked a lot better for the offensive line if you all three of those guys were out there. But all three of those guys were benched last year. I think that once that happens to you, you sort of think like, all right, do I trust this staff to play me? Am I going to get on a shot? So on and so forth. I think it's an understandable position if you're the player, especially if you're Spindler or Coogan, because you're down to your final year. So nothing, for all like playing time, development, degree, culture, all of that stuff. I mean, like playing time is number one. Kids want to play football. And all three of those guys just believed, I think understandably so, that they had a better shot to play elsewhere than they did here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say you could always probably throw enough money at them to try and get them to stay if you really wanted to, but there's a lot of, as you guys said, other factors that would probably rank higher on their list, and they all have reasons to believe they could go elsewhere and play and contribute. And yeah, two of them already have their degree, so.
Yeah, I think, these decisions were made more than 2 months ago. The season was fresh in their mind. What had just happened to them was fresh in their mind. Of course, it's 2025 and NIL money always matters. But I think at the time when they decided to transfer, it was first and foremost definitely about playing time. So could you have enticed them back? Mike Martin would now probably say no because we can't afford to pay, what they would do. Certainly they made more leaving Notre Dame than they would have at Notre Dame. So you can understand that, but I think it was way more about playing time at the moment anyway. All right, we're going to wrap up with a question from Manentai, and that is this. Every year you all note something either throughout the year or at its conclusion that there was evidence during the spring or summer that comes to fruition during the season. With that in mind, I want your best overreactions. What player or development did you notice during practice that will come to pass during the 2025 season?
Eli Raridan will be in contention for All-American tight end honors.
Hmm. All right, if you want like a really off platform pick here, I would say like Will Pauling will be one of the three best receivers on the team.
I think this isn't a player specific thing, but I think I looked it up. Like, obviously, this is aided by the playoff run last year, but 20 defenders played at least 300 snaps last year on defense. Um, and I think in part because there's a lot of young guys that want to emerge, but just looking at the defense and that so many different body types and skill sets and things and types of players who are flashing, like I could see if I'm overreacting, Notre Dame kind of going even deeper this year. Like I just think they have a lot of different guys and versatility that they could use to kind of throw different things at offenses this year.
I really like all those picks. And JB, you reminded me that because segment one was running a little long, I cut off the tight ends, but Eli Raridan made a great play on Saturday, and he certainly looks the part. And it's his job. That's why I asked Marcus Freeman about it, about him and Jalen Sneed, because, a couple years removed from those knee injuries, now it's his spot. I think Eli Raridan is ready to take off. And I think maybe it's an overreaction, but if it isn't, Notre Dame has a chance to be a really, really good football team again if those interior defensive linemen are as good as we think they are, and if they're as good as we think they are, and the depth, I mean, the potential for depth there, I think, is really significant. And at the front of that pack, I think that Jason Onye is going to prove to be for real based upon, I know we're overreacting maybe a little bit about Saturday, but I think his motivation and the way he's come back and the determination, I think he's going to help lead that defensive tackle unit to be a heck of a good one. Anything else, guys? We are going to wrap it up with that. This has been Irish Illustrated Insider. We'll be back on Thursday, April 10th for another edition. Until then, Tim Priester, Drew Mentak, John Bryce, Pete Sampson. This has been Irish Illustrated Insider.